Yep.
Video?
Yep. You say it's time for climate control.
Yeah.
In other words, for us to take active measures to cool the earth, things like cloud seeding that can make it rain, other measures that you've talked about. This is pretty scary for a lot of people. It conjures, some pretty apocalyptic scenarios like Snowpiercer and things like that. Why is it time to consider embracing or scaling some of these geoengineering projects?
Because all other reasonable approaches have failed miserably.
Welcome to Future Around and Find Out. We are in Troy, New York today at the site of Ecovative and My Forest Foods. They are the sellers of America's top-selling non-meat bacon. We also talked to the founder, Eben Bayer, about his plans to put giant parasols in the stratosphere to cool the earth down below. Why do these two things relate to each other? Because they are both ways to help Spaceship Earth, as he likes to call it, the Buckminster Fuller phrase for this rock that we all live on. Eben Bayer is trying to protect Earth, and he's doing it by growing mushrooms and using the roots of them, called mycelium, to make things like styrofoam that's not made of plastic, to make bacon that's not made of pigs, to make leather that's not made of cows. And then he has a new wild idea that we talked about today called sundial, which would be shade as a service. So imagine a giant parasol way up in the stratosphere, and it is cooling us. And he has a plan for people to pay for it because he believes business model innovation is just as important as engineering innovation if we are going to live long and prosper here on Earth, on Spaceship Earth. So stay tuned for a very special edition of Future Around and Find Out, recorded live at Ecovative in Troy, New York. Welcome to Future Around and Find Out, where we celebrate the breakthroughs called BS on the hype and explore how things might go sideways and how we, together, can steer the future in the right direction. Hi, I'm Dan Blumberg. I'm an independent technologist and former NPR journalist, and on the show, you'll hear sharp takes on what builders need to know now. Learn more, sign up for the newsletter, and ask questions of upcoming guests at futurearound.com. You're fond of referring to us living here on Spaceship Earth. Mm-hmm. What are you trying to conjure when you repeat that phrase? And how does it affect how you prioritize your time and attention?
I think this phrase was coined by Buckminster Fuller, and when I invoke it, I'm trying to conjure this feeling of ownership over the planet we're on, that it's not just somewhere you show up and you spend some time on and then you leave. It's like, no, we're all working together on something that actually has a life support system. Like our biosphere is a really cool life support system. Starts with a magnosphere, goes into the atmosphere, goes into our water cycle, and humans are really the only ones that have been sort of tinkering with this now. And I think it's our duty to do that, but do it in a way that's really good for our spaceship and means everyone's participating and keeping it operating.
Yeah. And I love that in this conversation, we're going to talk about both things that are under the ground. Mm-hmm. We're going to talk about things that are like you want to put way up high in the stratosphere and probably 100 other things in between that you're also thinking about when you're with whatever free time I don't think you actually have. I'm curious, how does it all tie together?
For me, I view myself as an engineer of Spaceship Earth. And so I want my time here to be spent essentially improving the systems that make our biosphere work and allow humans to do all the kind of stuff, including like recording podcasts that we do well on Earth. And so that's my goal.
Tell me, like, what do you see as the biggest problems that you're trying to solve?
Fundamentally, it's around finding the most efficient ways to use the resources we have, which start with the amount of solar flux we get from the sun, to allow the biosphere life to kind of continue, I would say, indefinitely on this little rock, and then allow humans to express themselves to the fullest. And I mean, if you look at the problem side of it, we don't have enough energy. The way we produce materials tends to be relatively inefficient. There's always a demand for higher quality, better food, and we struggle to fulfill that demand for everyone. Those are just kind of a couple that scratch the surface. And then if you go out on the sort of bigger question, I think this idea that like we're constantly like modifying our planet through animal agriculture, through emissions, and we're absolutely starting to have an impact on where it goes. And I think moving from that modification without ownership is really dangerous.
Yeah. And I mean, where would you rate, I know there's, when it comes to like the nuclear threat, there's like the doomsday clock. Like where do you rate the like threat level right now of the problem that we face right now in terms of climate change and other related things?
Well, I would say personally, like I do look at a geologic timescale. And so my sort of first order assessment of humanity is like Earth will be okay with or without the humans, though I think the Earth could look very different, and it has looked very different throughout history, right? Including like when it formed. I would say the threat level that we no longer have a biosphere like the biosphere that we might have thought of from the 1900s or the world we live in now is very, very high. Like within 100 years, I think the biosphere could be very, very different. And I think the question for us as humans is, I think we have evidence that's a great biosphere, and should we actually grab the mantle and sort of try and preserve that biosphere more actively and move from maybe a limited number of very specific interventions to maybe broader ones that haven't been considered?
Tell me about the birth of Ecovative. I mean, I got off to when you were in college, you started it. You were very quickly on the stages of Pop Tech and TED. That sounds like a wild ride.
Yeah. I started Ecovative when I was like, I guess 21. Right when I graduated undergraduate with Gavin, who's my co-founder here. And it was a wild ride. I mean, we kind of launched this like mushroom insulation company with this new way of making materials through growing materials into the financial crisis, 2007, 2008.
Fun.
Fun. We want to do building insulation, which is like pretty boring staid field, like going and being like mushroom insulation. They were like, I don't know about that. And then, it was clean tech hadn't really even gotten going yet. And so it was an interesting time to sort of start the business.
I don't remember exactly when clean tech had its big moment, but you were a little bit early, it sounds like.
We were early and then we were late and then early again. And now we're in the middle.
Tease that out a little bit for me, please.
I would say like when Ecovative formed, there was, we formed, I guess, in the bastion of peak oil, right? When people were really concerned about energy side, and we were a materials story. And I would say by the time folks became more interested in materials, we were already evolving towards food. And we tend to be a little ahead of the curve here in some ways.
Mm-hmm. So tell me, I mean, I want to understand how you alighted on mycelium, and please define that for folks who don't know what it is, because I didn't know what it was until recently. How did you discover its incredible properties, that it could be, that you use for so many things, but from building materials to food and probably other things that I don't know about?
So mycelium is like the root structure of a mushroom, not technically, but like it starts its life cycle underground in the soil. And then at the sort of usually the end of its life cycle, when it wants to reproduce, it differentiates. So it goes from sort of this like root like stem cell to making more specific tissue types, which you would see as a mushroom. I encountered mycelium growing up farming. I grew up on a working farm. We did pigs, chickens, cows, so like raised them, ate them or various parts of them, and then maple syrup. And in the maple syrup business, I was exposed to a lot of wood chips and a fair amount of mycelium growing on the wood chips on the farm.
And so what is it, though, about mycelium that allows it to be so versatile? You can do so many things with it, that you've built a whole factory that we just toured. Like, tell me more about it. Like, had others not noticed these properties that you had, or like, how did you get going here?
I think fungi in general has been like an understudied kingdom. And I particularly think the intersection of how would you use fungal mycelium for material science was just like a completely unexplored question. So when you go into an area like that, there's like a lot of low-hanging fruit, just because like no one's tried overlaying these two ideas. And then mycelium is uniquely suited to some of these things. It's nature's recycler. It's also a molecular assembly system. And it produces compounds and structures that are in between what we would think of as plant-like or wood-like and what we think of as animal-like, so meat-like or leather-like. And it turns out for humans, we've also synthetically done stuff like that we call plastic. And so it occupies sort of almost like a mirror zone to plastic in the bio kingdom.
Mm-hmm. And so that's sort of where you started, was as a substitute for plastic. Is that right?
We started looking at replacing expanded polystyrene in insulation, plastic in insulation, plastic in packaging. Exactly.
And I know I've heard you say, and that did well, it was good, but not good enough. Can you explain how you pivoted to food? Are you still making materials with it as well?
Yeah, so mushroom packaging is produced worldwide, either under license or we open sourced a lot of that technology the past few years. It has a really good niche it services where it can cost competitively replace styrofoam or molded plastics as a molded shape. It'll compost in your garden. It looks nice. It protects your package. And it does that best when it's produced pretty locally, and I'd say like medium to small scale. And so that's how we've seen it adopted often across Europe. That's good, though it's just a tiny little like dent in the armor of the amount of single-use plastic that gets used worldwide. That level of good represents like exactly what the technology can offer the market right now. And it does better in places like Europe, where people are charged for throwing out styrofoam, right? That external cost to the environment has a cost associated with it. You see tremendous uptake. And so That solution is ready, but requires I think other societal forces to be used worldwide, and was one of the reasons we kept pushing into other domains.
Okay, so tell me about bacon. I know you spent several years perfecting mycelium bacon. Maybe it's not perfect yet, but getting really good at making really good bacon. Tell me how you went on that journey and what it took to get mycelium to taste great and be sold at Whole Foods, et cetera.
So the bacon isn't perfect yet, but we have been maniacally focused on this question. So for 5 years, My Forest Foods has been a single SKU company, just producing what we believe is the best plant-based bacon in the market. It's also like a functional food. It's got ergothioneine in it, which you'd find in a supplement for immune health. It's also really high in fiber and protein. My Forest Foods was completely inverting why Ecovative started, though. Ecovative started to take something that's mushrooms, normally thought as food, and use it as a material and develop all these sorts of expertise around viewing mycelium as a material, growing it at scale like a material, industrializing it like a material. And My Forest Foods was essentially taking that platform, that way of growing non-edible mycelium, and coming all the way back and growing these really delicious gourmet edible mushrooms that aren't mass produced, and basically finding a new way to make those mushrooms and a new way to deliver that amazing tissue to the market.
You recoiled when I said, by accident, the word perfect, because I know it's not.
Yeah.
Probably nothing for you is ever perfect.
Yeah.
What has been some of the hardest things to get right here?
Well, tasting like bacon's really hard. Bacon's really good. It's one of the most delicious foods in the world. We picked the category for that reason too, because it's if you can make it in bacon, you can make it anywhere. But getting that flavor profile right has been really hard. And then bacon's an interesting food in that it's like a whole cut, but it's thin. It needs to get crispy. And so managing the right slice thickness, slice moisture content, and then getting it laid out in the pack right has actually been one of our biggest challenges outside of mushroom biology.
And again, I just want to draw the connection here back to Spaceship Earth. Why does making an incredible non-meat bacon relate to saving or protecting Spaceship Earth?
So the thesis here is that, well, one, animals are tasty. People like to eat meat. People are going to eat meat until the end of time. No judgment there. I grew up farming. With that said, it's not the most efficient way we have to turn, say, carbon into meat-like structure. And the ability to take low-grade sawdust, the best next use of this sawdust is to burn it in a boiler, and instead of turning it into low-grade BTUs, turn it into really delicious, high-quality protein that people want to eat because it's craveable. And once you're eating it, you find out hey, it's high in fiber, it's high in protein, it's low in calories, it's got immune boosting benefits, and it didn't involve the slaughter of a pig, maybe in that order for you as a customer, not you specifically, is a kind of an amazing magic trick. And that's a really great way to change flows of raw material on Spaceship Earth to allow many, many more humans to have a really great culinary experience while simultaneously kind of lowering the threshold of impact humans are having to be on the spaceship.
Got it. Is there a particular why now to building with mycelium, to any other things that you're working on that were not possible years ago, but they are now, or for you and others, there's a new focus?
Technologically, I would say no. What's kind of interesting about mycelium materials is you could have done it in 1955.
It's just been there? It's just been waiting?
It's just waiting. And so why now is more cultural, right? I think, that gets back to this, well, we can create a really nice mycelium leather that has many of the specs of cow leather. Why now? Well, for whatever reason, humans in the fashion sector demand that option. And that's what's driving that side of the business. In the food sector, there's different, plant-based meat was a forcing function. Now, I believe functional foods will be a forcing function. As technologists, our goal is to use these cultural vectors to, yes, satisfy what the culture wants at that moment, but then bring durable infrastructure, right, into the world that will, as these waves of how we perceive these things change. But humans been eating protein for 10,000 years. We've been eating fiber for 10,000 years. My Forest Foods goal is to be a new domesticated crop that's just part of the food system in the future. Bring a new food into the world.
Yeah.
And so the why now is I really think more from our side, from humans, what humans want.
Mm-hmm. You say it's time for climate control.
Yeah.
In other words, for us to take active measures to cool the Earth, things like cloud seeding that can make it rain, other measures that you've talked about. This is pretty scary for a lot of people. It conjures, some pretty apocalyptic scenarios like, Snowpiercer and things like that. Why is it time to consider embracing or scaling some of these geoengineering projects?
Because all other reasonable approaches have failed miserably. We have tried to do CO2 control globally for 20 or 30 years now. We've freaking COP conferences every year.
Yep.
I went to Rio 20, whenever. Nothing's ever happened. We are completely failing on this, and CO2 levels are continuing to rise. Independent of you believe that is the primary forcing function, like you should look at sulfur dioxide rules in the Atlantic driving changes in temperature. The reality is the Earth climate is changing. We as humans started doing this when we started doing animal agriculture, right? When we started creating grasslands where there were trees. We doubled down on it when we started extracting energy, making essentially climate change companies that masquerade as energy companies, right? And I think the most dangerous thing we can do now is to keep going and pretend that we don't have our hands on the wheel. We absolutely have our hands on the wheel. And then the question is, well, where are we pointing it?
Okay. What are some of the things that you look to and say, this is great, we should be doing more of this? What are some of the questions you have about those efforts?
Well, first order, I would say the framing I would encourage folks to take on is we are geo-engineers. We farm animal, livestock. We live on planet Earth. We have impact. We emit CO2. We should not limit ourselves to modifying just one or two atmospheric gases to modify the planet. It's not how we operate, and it's a unbelievably constraining framing if you actually want to address this problem in a practical manner. When you start to take that frame, the options open way up. You see folks who are doing sulfur dioxide gas emission into the stratosphere. Make Sunsets is doing this in a somewhat uncontrolled manner, but it's a very cost-effective way to lower the temperature of the whole Earth by a quarter C. It's dangerous because there's no national coordination. It's dangerous because second-order effects you don't really find out until you do it. And it ends up in the same basket of global coordination problem. You have companies that are raising capital to do this in a more precise manner with measurability. So Stardust out of Israel has raised, I think now, $50 million. They're sort of waiting for a government to hire them to do this, in a sense. So a bet that governments will decide it's too dangerous for people and they're going to make a leap. And then you start to see approaches that are more modular on the ground, like marine cloud brightening, where you might actually spray water from the ocean into the air and lower the temperature rate in that area. And then just lastly on this, you see second order effects. We used to have tremendous sulfur dioxide emissions in our marine diesel, in our main shipping bunker fuel. And it turns out there was this cool spot over the Atlantic, which has been favorably modifying our climate here on the northeastern seaboard for the past 50 years. And we changed the regs a few years ago to reduce sulfuric rain in the ocean, which may or may not be beneficial in a material way. But suddenly we took all this, we basically have been geoengineering that shipping channel for 50 years and we just turned it off. Right, with no consideration of the heat effects and just this myopic consideration on one environmental parameter. And so the first effect is just we gotta expand our consciousness to really look at the whole system.
Yeah, I want to get to sundial. I want to get to, you have an idea that you debuted at PopTech 2025. Tell us about it.
So the concept behind sundial is to look at the geoengineering approaches that exist and sort of say, what are the challenges? Well, they're not reversible once you do, say, sulfur dioxide emissions like you've done it. They're not particularly targetable, right? So it's hard to sort of charge a customer if you're managing the whole planet right off the bat. It makes it hard to scale them. And then they're not necessarily predictable, the second order effects, which is one of the reasons people get so scared. So you can't really opt into it as well. Mm-hmm. So sundial kind of flips that on your head and says, well, what would an optimal solution look like? One that was attributable, so you could directly attribute it to a customer. It was local, so it wasn't a global solution, and then was fully reversible, right? So if there was a second order effect or you decided it wasn't doing what you said it was going to do, you could turn it off immediately. And that really gets you into this zone, I think of as shade as a service, which is how would you actually deliver shade to people all over the planet? And in doing so, reflect sunlight. And in doing so, you get two benefits. One, you provide a direct measurable benefit to a customer. Oh, it's getting colder. I was too hot. Now I'm getting cooler.
Yeah.
And two, you get sunlight off the planet, right? So you start to reduce the energy budget of Earth. And connecting those two ideas connects human desire, human greed, my own personal benefit with global good, shedding planetary albedo or modifying planetary albedo, and then starts to drive you into what business model would work there and what technical solutions.
So before we get to that, I want to make sure, can you explain the concept of how we would get shade as a service?
Absolutely. To have, I think, precision shade as a service, you could start, as we did, thousands of years ago with umbrellas. Parasols are pretty good, actually dollars per square foot of shade, almost impossible to beat. But we've kind of pushed those to the limits in terms of what people are doing. You could just keep pushing that umbrella up into the sky, right? You can go over your house, you can go over a city, you can go all the way up into geosynchronous orbit. My belief is that the right place to do this is in the upper atmosphere, where we float high altitude balloons, and that at that point you enter a sweet spot where you sort of can create a virtual cloud. Would actually be like a virtual cloud experience on the ground, like this dappled experience of light going over you, but is not so high up into the atmosphere that you'd require unreasonable amounts of sail area. For instance, like you could produce enough metallicized plastic film today to like do a significant amount of cooling from that height, because of like the shadow effect you get when you move a sheet up in the sky.
How did you come to this idea? I mean, this again, we've gone from like mushrooms and growing under the ground, and now we're way almost in space now. Like, I'm curious where the ideas. Where do you get your ideas? How do you go on?
The key to generating any idea, is to generate lots of ideas and lots of bad ideas. And so like, I mean, it's more than a year ago, I've been sort of dreaming on it, like, how would you, so I got to that question, which is like, oh, we're going to have to do something about albedo. Right now, the solution that we're going to do is we're going to pump sulfur dioxide into the air. That's not great. How could you do it better? So, and then I just, I dreamed of like lots of bad ideas. Like, what if we put mushroom spores into cooling towers at nuclear power plants, right? And all those spores go up and they act as like dust in the atmosphere. Okay, maybe not the right idea. Then I started thinking about birds, and could we like breed enough swallows? Do you remember like we used to have the carrier pigeon in the US, and like there used to be such swarms of these birds that it would darken a town. And people have firsthand accounts of like towns getting colder. And I even went to the point of calculating like how many acres of land would be required in the US to create enough grain to like fly birds over cities.
You could simulate solar eclipses. I was in Vermont, northern Vermont. I drove up for the total solar eclipse last year because I wanted to experience the totality of it. And what was crazy about it was, like people said, it'll blow your mind and all that, and it did. And made me feel like I'm on Spaceship Earth, or on this little rock, floating about. But also, I witnessed it from the summit of Bolton Ski Mountain, and it was there had been a big snowfall. It was in April, but there had been a big snowfall, and it was mushy, like mashed potatoes skiing, like 2:30 in the afternoon. And I witnessed it from the summit of Bolton, so we had to ski to the bottom. And during the 3 minutes that the sun was shaded, the snow firmed up. And then when we skied down, I was like, oh, this is way better. Like, and then it got warm again within like 8 seconds. What was also amazing was the difference between, and this is the whole reason I drove for totality, but like the difference between like 99.9%, shading the sun and like 100%. It's 0.1% of sun is a lot of sun. Those are a few of the things that I learned that day.
It's interesting. What an incredible experience. And then the eclipse data is a really powerful way of showing this effect. And, it gets measured all the time. And you can even use like the WRF weather forecasting software, which we use to like forecast our weather, has an eclipse module. And you can simulate temperature drops using that eclipse module, and it's kind of tied to physics. And so there is a wonderful proof of concept right there.
Yeah, nice natural experiment. So what is your, as you pursue this idea, and you've discarded lots of others that sound like fun, where are you at right now with the concept, with the company, and what are some of the riskiest assumptions or things that you're trying to prove right now?
I would say with Sundial, I am still in the solution exploration and optimization phase. I started in biology thinking about like what biological solutions might fit here. I ended up, you keep kind of reducing a problem. Like I like to keep like shaving a problem away to like the core physics. And in the end, you end up with, how do you get a sheet of material in between the sun and a city? And how do you do that with the least amount of material, the least amount of economic cost, and the highest degree of precision? And I think that takes you to aerospace. I think that takes you to things that look like ultra high altitude gliders and ultra high altitude balloons. Google had this amazing project, Project Loon, where they floated these super heavy balloons around, demonstrated station keeping. And within that zone, there are a number of solutions that economically work that a power company would prefer you put negative power plants in the sky, right, to reduce electrical demand on the grid, rather than maybe build a new coal plant. And the next phase is then sort of taking the math from that and doing the aeronautics and deciding, can you really build an airplane, talking to airplane experts and see if you can fly that.
I know a key thing for you is not just engineering innovation, it's business model innovation. I know that you have pretty strong opinions that these things there has to be a direct benefit and a business model that makes sense. So tell me about that way of thinking, and then either how it applies to Sundial or My Bacon or the rest of it.
Yeah, so Sundial is a constraint-first company. incorporated in Delaware. And I would say the thought process behind that is like this problem definition around reversibility for shade, delivering shade as a service, doing it in a way that links an individual customer to the scalability of the platform, and then having this like global good because you're reversing planetary albedo. In Ecovative, we try to do that by reducing plastic pollution, right, through packaging, reducing animal agriculture in leather or in food, right? In Sundial, we'll be reducing albedo, right, the amount of sunlight that hits the earth. Like that would be the thing we want to modify. The business model there needs to find a paying customer, and I think there's two tiers. There are individuals, there are events like the Olympics that might want to be cool, that make a lot of sense as like initial entry points or later high performance customers, but you really want to find a customer that can pay for a lot of scale. And this is where utilities come in. So if you look at a city like Dubai or Phoenix, Arizona, a tremendous amount of the electrical power is used to cool the city. Like in Phoenix, I think it's 17 gigawatts on the grid. Maybe half of that or 60% of that is going to running air conditioners. And if you look at this eclipse modeling, the grid is very, very sensitive to small changes in temperature. So if you precisely shaded buildings and lowered the light isolation on them by 5, 10, 15%, you can take megawatts off the grid. And so suddenly you've got this customer, and a customer like Phoenix, the grid would pay a lot of money in the summer for demand reduction in certain hours. Hey, shut down your data center. We're running out of power. Rather than doing that, you can reflect sunlight over a city and bring the power consumption back down. And it allows you to sort of create utilities in the sky, kind of like negative power plants. And that gives you a very scalable way to build this infrastructure. And then you can retask the infrastructure to do other cooling projects.
So I just want to make, that's very, very, very cool. I love how you put these things together in your brain, and I'm excited for this. I just want to make sure people get exactly what would be happening. So there are balloons up in space. Am I getting this right?
Gliders. Let's say gliders.
Okay.
Yeah,
So can you explain what it looks like?
So just in an embodiment, imagine a glider that's, say, at 30,000 feet, and it's towing behind it a thin film, right? Just like a kind of a kite behind it. And the kite is both providing lift and providing shade to the ground beneath it. You would experience this as a user on the ground as like a highly diffuse shadow, right? So you would essentially be like, I feel like there's a cloud above me. The glider would actually just sort of be doing either flying directly into like a 7 meter per second average wind, so just sort of floating above you, which would be sort of around stall speed, or potentially, mostly would be doing that, but it's potentially would be doing like very slow circles you couldn't see. If you were in a building in Phoenix, Arizona, your temperature in the building, the AC load, the apparent load the AC compressors would see would start to drop. The grid power that section of the city was starting to consume would start to go down. And the utility would see it as either someone had turned off the AC compressor or someone was putting more PV power into the grid. And so in that way, you can really relax the demand on the grid while also providing a tangible benefit, which is if you walk outside in that moment, you're also going to experience a lower temperature right on your skin.
So is the challenge right now, how much of the balance of the challenge right now is proving that this can work, or is it getting it cost effective?
So I would say they're one and the same, which is right now on the techno-economics, you've got kind of like the Elon Musk approach to these things, which he took with SpaceX, which is like, how much does aluminum cost? How much does copper cost? How much does rocket propellant cost? Like, this is how much it should cost to get to space, which is like an insanely low number, right? And then you just work to get as close to that number as possible. You never approach that number, you never get to the number, but you can actually get much closer than we do. In that sort of analysis, like the amount of thin film you need, it's okay. Even if it only lasts a year and you got to bring them back down and fix them. So the next question I think is, and this is the tricky one, is like practicability. Can engineers build these systems, maintain these systems, and launch these systems in a way that works? And that's kind of, I think you got to build it. And so that's probably the next step here.
Right on. I want to bring my producer in who has a question for you.
All right.
You want to come in here? All right, this is my producer. He also might be related to me. He also might be wearing a shirt that's going to get us in trademark trouble. But I don't care. Bring it in. All right, we'll just, it's your favorite movie. They're not going to.
The lawyer's not going to do that.
Yeah, come on. Yeah. He's how old are you?
I'm 11.
All right, so we've go ahead. Introduce yourself. Ask a question.
I'm Julian, and I have a question. And my question is, what are some other plans for saving the world? Or Spaceship Earth.
I love that. It's a good question. The number one thing is to get more humans thinking about that question. So we all have to be engineers of Spaceship Earth, and we all have to be architects of Spaceship Earth. And there are a lot of different problems that need to be solved to make life better for one person, 10 people, 1 billion people. I would look to the atmosphere, though.
you have any follow-ups?
No.
Thank you, Julian. I have one or two final questions. On stage at PopTech this year, you encouraged us all to be brave. You just shared the same with my son. What does that mean on an individual level? What are things that we can all do to meaningfully help Earth, Spaceship Earth?
I really think just from a cultural perspective, something we can do is to change our view on the climate and climate change to something that is happening to us, which is something we are doing, right? And then allow that frame to be open to solutions across not just sundial, but solutions across this ecosystem of how are we going to manage our planet, not just like today, but going forward, and sort of open our minds to that question and be brave. It's scary to be responsible for a whole planet.
Yeah.
But we are. No, my dog's not going to do it. She doesn't have thumbs, right? Like, no, but seriously, like, so I
Maybe
think,
that's your next business plan, though, dogs with thumbs.
you know, it could be. It could solve an important problem for dogs. The big problem with dogs, this is a diatribe, and I just took my dog to the vet, is that the dogs don't pay. So the vet is incentivized to make the human happy, and I don't think the dog is getting the best possible medical outcome, but that's probably a different podcast.
Yeah.
No, I think I really do think people need to be brave and brave around discourse. I think we really trapped ourselves in this idea that like it's punitive. I can't eat meat. You know, you can eat meat and you should eat other great sources of protein, right? I can't emit CO2. You know what? To make everyone really wealthy in this planet, we gotta produce a lot of energy. So like, let's be really open about ways we manage climate and manage CO2 budget, right? And I think this idea of yes-anding and being owners of our system is just a framing that we don't yet have as a population.
If I came back and interviewed you, and I hope I do, you know, hopefully sooner than 10 years, but if I came back in 10 years, what do you think we're going to be talking about then? That like seeds that are being planted now that you think are really exciting that are going to manifest in the near-ish future, science fiction-y things?
I think that the things that we will see in 10 years are going to be inference in AI is going to be analog, like neuromorphic computing. And so I think you'll see substrates that look less like flat chips and more like neuromorphic analog chips. And I think there'll be a wonderful return to like the 1940s technology when we did like pneumatic computing and hydraulic computing and like through like basically representing equations as analog functions. I think like how we do inference just sort of demands we end up back there. And that'll be kind of wild because it'll turn computers from these like super quantized, truly digital things to these things that both behave squishy and under the surface are like a little squishy.
Wow. I have like 100 glossary questions to ask you because I'm not an engineer. So there were a lot of words there. Inference, neuromorphic. Can you give me that one more time for my producer here?
All right. So like when we do inference today in AI systems, a lot of the math we do could be more efficiently represented as a continuous function. And those continuous functions are often how we think of the human brain working. So neuromorphically, where you have nerves, yes, there's a synaptic pulse, but there's all these other kind of integrations happening in between there. And then that takes us all the way back to how we used to do computation before we had the digital microprocessor that broke things into 0-1 chunks.
We had people called computers.
And we had pneumatic computers where you would use like air pressure essentially to do like a differential equation because you can represent you can almost represent all math in physical embodiments, right? And so the physical structure is the math. And in the sort of math we now do for AI, there are things like voltage laws, like V equals IR, volts equals amperage times resistance, right? Like that relationship can be embedded into a physical substrate that can then basically multiply matrices together, which is how you do like a lot of the inference work.
Okay.
But do it really efficiently. And so that allows you to like reduce your energy cost by like a factor of 1,000 in doing inference. Essentially taking like a general purpose computation device and making a specialized computation device.
Okay. So tease that out one more step. So we care about more efficient inference because it's going to unlock what kind of things do you think?
So we're going to do two things. We'll put data centers in space to capture the most amount of like sunlight possible. And then simultaneously, we're going to want to have inference, I think, as close to the human body as possible. So like on-device inference. And when you go down that path, power consumption will always be a challenge. And like the human brain is a great example of a very efficient couple watt neuromorphic computer. And you can, without using like wet, squishy biology, analog computation devices that use electricity that mimic many of those functions, but do so at a much reduced power level.
Eben, thank you so much. This blowing my mind. I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you.
Thanks so much for coming up.
Yeah.
Come back in 10 years or 5 years or next year for skiing. You know,
all of it.
Good. Cool.
Thank you. This is Future Around and Find Out, and I am so excited to keep exploring with you, to keep steering the future in the right direction. Go to futurearound.com to get the newsletter, to ask questions of upcoming guests, and to find more ways that we can build a better future together.